With this video, we're starting a brand new series. A new series on our channel called SPSS from Scratch. Hello everyone. In this video, we're starting a new series together. A new series called SPSS from Scratch. On our channel, we actually have videos on a wide range of topics for everyone, from those who have never heard of SPSS to those who are experts in certain areas. While preparing these videos, our approach was to let viewers find and watch whichever topic they were interested in. However, we keep getting comments from you asking for videos that can be followed in order, starting from scratch. That's why we thought it would be useful to create such a series. I believe that, as it stands, this series will be one of the best SPSS series ever made in Turkey as of today. I think it will make a significant contribution to this field. This video is the first lesson of this series. Another frequent comment we've received from you is the request to share the data so that we can work on it together in our videos so far. We're taking that into account in this series as well. By downloading the data, you will also be able to practice along if you wish. You can find information about how this will work in the video description. However, if you don't have the SPSS program, you should first obtain it. You can download a trial version from the official SPSS website. If your university provides access, you can download or access it from there. Or you can download it from various other websites on the internet. Unfortunately, I can't make any specific recommendations on this matter. I'm assuming that you have downloaded and installed the program. Alright, after this introduction, let's start our first lesson. The topic of our first lesson is getting to know SPSS in general. What is the SPSS program? Let's start by getting some general information. Actually, since this is a SPSS from Scratch series, you might be expecting to see a blank screen. I want to leave the blank screen for our second lesson. First, before that lesson, in this first lesson, I want to give you some basic information about SPSS on a filled screen. In the second lesson, we'll explain from the very beginning how we can enter the different information you see on the screen here. Now, first of all, when we open the SPSS screen, when we start the SPSS program, you'll see that an output screen like the one you see here also opens. This screen will appear in front of you every time you perform a save operation, and whenever a report is generated here on the screen, you can save it. However, there's no harm in closing it before any report is generated. You don't have to save it. Now, I'm coming over here, clicking close, and selecting Don't Save. I'm closing it for now. Later on, as we do analyses and our reports are generated, I'll explain how we can save that screen and what we can do with it, what operations we can perform through it. Now, when we look at the screen, we're first greeted by an interface similar to Excel. A familiar view appears before us. Just like in Excel, there are two tabs at the bottom. As you know, there are tabs in this section in Excel as well. However, the way SPSS's tabs work here is a bit different. In fact, to explain how SPSS works, we should start by describing these tabs here. There are two tabs here. One of them is Variable View. Right now, we are in Variable View. In other words, we are on the variable screen in the Variable View. Besides this, there is also a Data View tab. In the Data View tab, we have the data belonging to our participants. For example, in the first row, there is the data we entered for our first participant. But before entering this data, we first need to go to the variable screen and perform some operations. What are these operations? Now, I will explain these in detail, but just to briefly repeat, there are two tabs. The first of these two tabs is the variable tab, the variable screen. Here, we perform certain operations. Then, after switching to the data tab and preparing the infrastructure as a result of the operations we've done, we enter our data into this screen. We will explain in detail how to do these things. Now, I want to switch back to the variable view, the variable screen. As the name suggests, this is the variable screen. The reason we call this the variable screen is because our variables are located here. So, what does variable mean? To put it simply, here we will enter information about gender. Gender is a variable here. Later, we will enter information about age. That is also a variable. Education level, marital status, place of residence, we call all of these variables. Why do we call them variables? Let me give you a little information. Because within the gender variable here, there are two pieces of data that can change. The participant's information here changes as either female or male. That's why we call this the gender variable. We will also explain in detail later how to enter these. Now, we said that our variables are on the variable screen. First, we need to enter our variables here. Then, on the other screen, we will enter the information related to these variables. In other words, we will do data entry. When we return to the variable view, we first see different columns here. In the first of these columns, it says name. Name is the column where we write the name of the variable. We write the name of the variable briefly. We express it in a very short way. For example, for gender, it's enough to write CNSYT or CNS, and it's better not to use Turkish characters here. Because when you use Turkish characters, for example, characters like C or S, you might encounter some problems in advanced analyses later on. For this reason, as a habit, I recommend not using Turkish characters. There's also another rule here. When you write a variable like education level, as you see here, which consists of two separate words, you can't leave a space between them. Variables are defined this way in programming languages. You can add an underscore between them. This is generally the standard practice. You can do it this way. You can use a code like ect_dzy here. Here, as I mentioned earlier, we write the short names of the variables. I recommend not using abbreviations that are too hard to understand here. Later on, you might have to go back and check what it was. You might need to look it up. I suggest using abbreviations that you can understand. We write the explanation, the main explanation, in the column called label, which means label in English. We write what it is here. We write things like gender, age, education level, marital status here. What we write here are the texts that appear in the tables within the report. So we see this part in the tables, but we don't see the other part. After mentioning this, we write the name of the gender here. We write its explanation here. Then we can move on to explaining the column over there. In this column, when you first open it, you'll see the word numeric. Numeric means that you will enter a numerical value. Here, we also see string. This, on the other hand, is a verbal description. It means you will be entering a data value. I changed it to string like this. Actually, when you first open it, numeric appears by default. So what does numeric mean? Let me switch back to the data view for a moment. Here, we see that the data entry for gender is done as 1 and 2. We don't write it as female or male here. 1, 2. So we're introducing SPSS here. We're saying, I'm going to enter 1 and 2 numerically for you. You'll understand what 1 means and what 2 means. I'll do that from a different section, but for now, we can briefly explain it like this. When we come back here, we've understood what numeric means. There's also string. We've written the place of residence as a string. Here, in the place of residence section, we see that it's written as a description in words. So that's what we call a string. If we write 1 here instead of Gezios Mampasa, that would be numeric. But if we write it as Gezios Mampasa like this, then it becomes a string data type here. All right, let's move back here again. We've explained the column over there. We've explained this column here. We just explained this description here. Here, we see a width. What does this width mean here? This means that we can enter an 8-character numeric value here. We can increase this. When we come here, we can make it 8, 10. We can change it however we want. But if it's 8 here, you can't enter a value with more than 8 digits. And here, we see that the string is set to 50. For example, if it were 5 here and we wanted to write Kukiksekmis, once we wrote Kukuk, we wouldn't be able to write the rest. This allows us to write up to 50 characters. You can increase this as much as you want. That's what width means here. Here we see the decimals column. Decimals means the number of decimal places. We see that the number of decimal places is 0 here. And here we see that it's 2. Again, you can change this however you like. Here's what that means. Let me show you. There is no decimal place here. Here, I wanted to assign a number to each participant. Like first participant, second participant, third participant, and so on. Since I didn't want any decimal places here, it wouldn't have mattered even if there were. I changed the decimals here to 0. But here, we see that there are 2 digits next to each numerical value as decimal places. These come from the value of 2 that we wrote here. Because it says 2 here, we see 2 decimal places next to these numbers. Here, it doesn't matter whether there are 2 decimal places or not. This is again something that's up to you. However, generally having 2 decimal places is a common practice in SPSS. I can suggest that it's beneficial to get used to it this way. Continuing on, we see the values column here. This is a very important column. I'll explain how to enter data here in our next lesson. In this lesson, I want to explain what this section is about. When you hover over it, you'll see 3 dots here. When we click on these three dots, we see that some entries like 1 for female, 2 for male have been made here. This is what I mentioned earlier. In my dataset, 1 means female, 2 means male, so we make our entries here accordingly. After entering the data here, SPSS recognizes the information we've provided. If we look at a different variable, when we click here, we see that definitions like 1 for illiterate, 2 for primary school graduate, 3 for middle school graduate have been made. In some places, we see the word none. That means no definition has been made. Why? Because we see that no definition has been made here. Let's check from here as well. Why? Because when we move to age from here, when we look at age, we see the age data as 31, 32, 33, 34, and so on. Here, 41 simply means its own value. In other words, 41 doesn't have any special meaning. That's why we didn't make such an entry. We'll explain the details again in our next lesson. After this, we see a column here labeled missing. At this stage, I don't find it necessary to go into this. Here, we see a column labeled columns. This is a value that indicates the width of the columns on the next screen, the data view screen. It seems that the variables here have a width of 11 units. And here, there is a width of 16 units. It's a measure that determines the width of the columns here. When I expand it like this and then switch to the other screen, we'll see that the measurement for the place of residence variable has changed there. Yes, we see that it has increased to 33. Yes, and then there's a column here called align, which means alignment. This is a column where, in the data view screen, we can set whether the information appears centered, to the right or to the left. We adjust these settings from here. The measure column here is also a very important one. Here, we assign a level of measurement to each of the variables over there. We'll cover the details of this in our upcoming lessons as well. There are 3 different options here. They are scale, ordinal, and nominal. Briefly, I can say this: scale is the highest level of measurement. When there is a measurement result, we select scale. Ordinal represents a ranking, as you can see from the icon here. Nominal, on the other hand, is a level of measurement that does not represent any ranking. I'll leave the details about these for our next lesson. As for our column named role, at this stage, there is nothing we need to explain. I'll skip this part as well. So we've generally covered our rows and columns here. On top of that, we can also take a look at what's in the upper section. At the very top, we first see menus like File, Edit, View, Data, and Transform. We'll explain what each of these menus does one by one in our upcoming lessons. For example, from the Analysis section here, we'll perform different analyses. From the Chart section here, we'll create various charts. Again, we'll carry out different operations from here. We'll go into detail about each of these. Just like in other programs like Word or Excel, there are menus here that let us perform different operations. Below that, in this section, there are shortcuts to some of the menus found within these main menus. There are shortcuts for certain operations. For example, when we click here, we see a menu called Go to Case or Variable. We'll explain what this means in more detail in our upcoming lessons when the time comes. You can also try these out yourself. You can perform different operations. I recommend giving it a try. By experimenting with what each feature does, you can easily pick up information like, what does this do? What does that do? So, in this lesson, I tried to give you a general introduction to what SPSS is and what the program does. In our upcoming lessons, starting from the very beginning and from data entry, our goal is to become experts in SPSS. I hope this has been helpful. I hope I haven't jumped from topic to topic. Making the first video is a bit difficult. Getting started is hard. In our next videos, I plan to provide clearer information. If you liked the video, I kindly ask you to show your appreciation. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, I kindly ask you to subscribe. If you have any questions, you can ask them below the video. I try to answer as soon as possible. I wish you ease in your work. See you in our next videos.